Some places aren't abandoned. They're waiting for the right soul to listen. The lighthouse stood alone against the Atlantic wind. A tall, weather-beaten tower perched on jagged cliffs where waves rolled in slow, endless rhythms. And when Ethan Cole bought it for $5, the town didn't try to stop him. They just shook their heads like they had already seen how this story would end. But Ethan had learned long ago that silence often held more truth than noise. At 40, with years behind him that felt heavier than they should, he wasn't looking for anything grand. Just a place where the world didn't press so hard against his thoughts. And the lighthouse, with its peeling white paint and rusted lantern room, seemed quiet enough to hold whatever he carried inside. Beside him, Rex stepped out of the old pickup, his paws landing softly on gravel as the wind tugged at his thick coat. The German shepherd lifted his head immediately, ears high, eyes scanning the horizon like he was reading something written in the air. Ethan noticed it, but said nothing. He had learned to trust that silence too. They walked up the narrow path, the door creaking open with a long, hollow groan that echoed through the empty structure. Inside, the air felt still, not just quiet, but heavy, like it had been waiting. The wooden floors stretched out in long, worn planks, each step releasing a soft complaint beneath Ethan's boots. Dust floated lazily through the thin beams of afternoon light slipping in through narrow windows. And somewhere above, the lantern room tapped, faintly in the wind, a slow, uneven rhythm that felt almost deliberate. Ethan set his bag down and exhaled, the kind of breath that came from deeper than lungs. But Rex didn't follow. Instead, the dog stopped near the center of the room, his body stiff, ears twitching with precise focus. Then slowly, he lowered his head, pressing one side of his muzzle close to the floor, listening, truly listening. Ethan frowned, stepping closer. "What is it, boy?" he murmured, but Rex didn't respond, not with movement, not with sound, just a low, almost inaudible vibration rolling through his chest. Not a warning, not fear, something else, something older. Ethan knelt beside him, placing his hand flat against the wood. At first, there was nothing, just the cold, solid stillness of old timber. But then it came, faint, subtle, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention, a soft pulse beneath his palm, steady, measured, like a distant heartbeat carried through the bones of the lighthouse itself. Ethan held his breath, counting without thinking, 1, 2, 3. Then again, the same pulse, exact, controlled, too precise to be random. His fingers tightened slightly against the floorboards as a memory flickered through him. Not clear, just a feeling, the kind that told you something important was trying to surface. Rex lifted his head slowly, amber eyes meeting Ethan's, and in that silent exchange, something shifted, not in the room, but inside him, because whatever was beneath that floor, it wasn't just hidden, it was waiting to be found. The second pulse came softer, but it was there, steady as breath beneath the boards. And Ethan did not move his hand this time. He let it rest there, feeling the rhythm settle into him, like something remembered rather than discovered. Rex shifted beside him, pacing once in a tight circle before returning to the same spot, his claws clicking lightly against the wood, then stopping, precise, as if marking a boundary only he could see. Ethan exhaled slowly and stood, scanning the room with a different kind of attention now, not looking at what was there, but at what did not quite belong. The floorboards stretched evenly except for one section near the center, just off by an inch or two, a subtle misalignment that most people would never notice. But Ethan had spent years reading patterns in places where mistakes could cost everything. He stepped over and pressed his boot down firmly. The sound changed immediately, hollow, faint, but unmistakable. Rex's ears lifted again, his body going still as the low vibration rolled once more beneath them. The timing was exact, almost mechanical, yet it carried something organic, something that refused to feel like a machine. Ethan crouched and ran his fingers along the edges of the boards, brushing away dust until a thin seam revealed itself, nearly invisible beneath layers of age. He traced it slowly, feeling where the wood gave just slightly under pressure, not broken, not weak, but designed to move. He glanced at Rex, who held his gaze for a brief moment before looking back down, as if urging him forward without a sound. Outside, the wind shifted direction, pushing against the tower with a long, low hum that echoed through the walls. but inside, the air felt different now. Heavier, aware, Ethan reached for the small pry bar in his pack, the metal cold in his hand as he slid it carefully into the seam. He paused, just for a second, not out of fear, but out of respect for the feeling that he was not the first to stand here, not the first to wonder what lay beneath. Then he applied pressure, slow and controlled. The wood resisted at first, then gave with a soft creak, lifting just enough to reveal darkness below. A narrow gap where cold air slipped upward, carrying a faint metallic scent. Rex stepped closer, lowering his head again. But this time he did not growl. Instead, he exhaled quietly, almost like recognition. Ethan widened the opening inch by inch until the board lifted free, and beneath it, a set of wooden steps descended into shadow, worn but intact, as if someone had expected them to be used again. The pulse came once more, stronger. Now, not just beneath his feet, but rising from below, echoing faintly through the hollow space. Ethan sat back on his heels, staring into the darkness as the last light of the day stretched across the floor behind him. And for the first time since he arrived, the lighthouse did not feel empty. It felt occupied, not by something threatening, but by something patient, something that had been waiting longer than anyone in town could remember. And beside him, Rex took one step forward, placing his paw carefully on the first stair, then looked back, as if to say the path had already been chosen. The darkness below did not feel empty. It felt deep, the kind of depth that held time instead of space. And when Ethan placed his foot on the first step, the wood answered with a low, steady creak that seemed to echo longer than it should have. Rex moved ahead of him without hesitation, descending slowly, each step deliberate, his body calm but alert, as if he already understood the shape of what waited below. Ethan followed, one hand brushing the stone wall beside him, the surface cold and slightly damp, carrying the faint scent of salt and metal. The narrow staircase curved gently, spiraling just enough to hide what lay at the bottom. And with each step, the light from above stretched thinner, fading into a muted glow that barely touched the edges of the space. The pulse came again, stronger now, not just beneath his feet but through the walls, a quiet vibration that seemed to pass through his chest as much as the structure itself. He paused halfway down, closing his eyes for a brief moment, listening the way he had been trained years ago, not for sound, but for pattern. And there it was, consistent, precise, not random. Movement, not shifting earth, something repeating with intention. Rex stopped a few steps below, turning his head slightly, ears angled back toward Ethan, waiting, not urging, just making sure he was still there. Ethan nodded without speaking and continued. The staircase opened into a small chamber carved directly into the rock, the ceiling low but solid, reinforced with old wooden beams that had darkened with age. The air was cooler here, still, almost untouched, and in the center of the room stood a structure that did not belong to the decay above, a metal console, weathered but intact, its surface lined with dials, switches, and glass panels clouded by time. Wires ran along the walls in careful lines, disappearing into the stone as if the lighthouse had been built around them rather than the other way around. Ethan stepped closer, his boots sounding softer here, absorbed by the dense ground beneath. Rex circled the room once, nose low, tracing an invisible path until he stopped. Near the far wall, where the pulse felt strongest, he sat down slowly, eyes fixed on a section of stone that looked no different than the rest, yet carried a quiet weight that pulled attention toward it. Ethan reached out and brushed his fingers across the console, a thin layer of dust lifting into the air. Beneath it, faint markings appeared, numbers and symbols etched with careful precision, not decorative, but functional. He did not recognize all of them, but he recognized enough to know. This was not random. This was designed, built with purpose, built to last. The pulse came again, and this time, one of the glass panels flickered faintly, just for a second, like a memory trying to return. Ethan stepped back slightly, his breath steady but deeper now, the realization settling in slowly. This was never just a lighthouse. It was something more, something hidden in plain sight. And as he turned toward Rex, the dog did not move, did not look away from the wall, only blinked once, calm and certain, as if the real secret was still waiting just beyond what they could see. The room held its silence as if it had been waiting to be heard. and Ethan slowly stepped toward the wall where Rex remained still, the dog's posture calm but anchored, like a compass fixed on a single direction. Ethan placed his palm against the stone, expecting cold, rough resistance. But instead he felt something different, a faint vibration running deeper here than anywhere else in the chamber, steady and deliberate. As if the wall itself carried the rhythm. He leaned closer, eyes narrowing as he studied the surface. At first it appeared solid, untouched, but then the details began to shift, subtle lines, barely visible, forming a shape too precise to be natural. A rectangular outline hidden within the stone, edges softened by time, but still present. Still intentional. Ethan traced the line slowly, following the perimeter until his fingers stopped at a small indentation near the lower corner, no larger than a coin, perfectly round. Rex shifted slightly, his tail lowering but not in fear, more like anticipation. Ethan glanced back at the console in the center of the room, the faint flicker he had seen earlier now gone. But something about the timing felt connected. The pulse beneath his hand aligned with the memory of that brief light. He stepped away from the wall and moved toward the console again, brushing more dust aside, revealing clearer markings now, numbers arranged in a sequence, not random, but measured. His mind moved through them instinctively, the same way it used to when patterns meant the difference between safety and danger. He counted silently, matching the rhythm he had felt. 30 seconds, exact intervals, repeating without variation. His gaze shifted to one of the switches, its position slightly off from the others, worn just enough to suggest it had been used more than once. Not recently, but not forgotten either. Rex let out a soft breath behind him, a quiet signal, not urging, just present. Ethan reached out, hesitating for only a moment, not from fear, but from the weight of knowing that whatever this place was, it had been built with purpose, and purpose rarely revealed itself without consequence. Then he moved the switch, slowly, carefully. The sound it made was almost too soft to hear, a subtle click that seemed to disappear into the stone. For a moment, nothing happened. The room remained still, unchanged, and then the pulse shifted, not louder, not faster, but deeper, like it had moved closer. The wall behind him responded with a low, almost imperceptible movement, not opening yet, but releasing, as if something long sealed had finally decided to listen. Ethan turned, his breath steady, his eyes fixed on the outline in the stone as it separated just slightly from the surrounding rock, enough to let a thin line of darker shadow form along its edge. Rex stepped forward this time, placing himself beside Ethan, both of them facing the wall in silence. And in that quiet moment, it became clear that this was never about finding something lost. It was about being allowed to see what had been hidden all along the line, and the stone widened slowly, not with force but with intention, as if the wall itself understood the moment had arrived, and a narrow seam opened just enough to release a breath of air that had not moved in decades, cool and dry, carrying a faint scent of metal and something older, something preserved. Ethan did not rush. He stood there watching the shift happen inch by inch, feeling the quiet gravity of it settle into the room. Rex stepped closer, his shoulder brushing lightly against Ethan's leg, grounding him, reminding him that whatever waited beyond that wall, they would face it together. The opening revealed a second chamber, smaller but more refined, its interior lined not with rough stone but with smooth panels, carefully fitted, untouched by decay. A soft, dim glow flickered to life along the edges, not bright enough to illuminate everything, but enough to suggest that whatever powered this place had not fully faded. Ethan moved forward, ducking slightly as he stepped through, his boots landing on a surface that felt different from the room behind him, more stable, almost insulated. The pulse that had guided them now felt centered here, no longer echoing through walls, but contained, focused. Rex followed closely, his movements slower now, more deliberate, as if even he understood this space required a different kind of attention. Along the far side of the chamber stood a large metal cabinet, its surface marked with the same precise engravings Ethan had seen before, but clearer now, sharper, untouched by time. Beside it, a narrow table held a collection of objects arranged with care, a compass, its needle still, yet not quite fixed, a set of keys, old but polished, and a thick folder bound in dark leather, edges worn but intact. Ethan approached the table first, his hand hovering briefly above the folder before he touched it. The material was firm, preserved, as if sealed away from the years above. He opened it slowly, revealing pages filled with diagrams, coordinates, and notes written in a careful, steady hand. The language was technical in places, but the meaning beneath it felt clear. This was not a record of what had been. It was a guide for what was meant to be found. Rex shifted again, his attention moving from the table to the cabinet, his ears lifting slightly. Ethan followed his gaze and stepped toward it, the pulse intensified just slightly. As he approached, not louder, but more defined, like a signal reaching its destination, he reached out and placed his hand against the cabinet door, feeling a faint warmth beneath the metal, subtle but undeniable. He paused, not out of hesitation, but because something inside him recognized the moment. This was not luck, not coincidence. This was alignment. The kind that only happened when the right person arrived at the right place without even knowing they had been searching for it. Rex sat beside him, calm and steady, his presence quiet but certain, and as Ethan wrapped his fingers around the handle, the realization settled fully. Whatever lay inside was not just hidden, it had been waiting for someone who would listen first and act second. Ethan did not pull the handle right away. Instead, he let his hand rest there, feeling the faint warmth beneath the metal. A quiet hum that seemed to travel through his fingers and settle somewhere deeper, like the echo of something familiar he could not quite name. Rex remained seated beside him, steady and watchful, his presence calm but alert, the kind of stillness that only came when everything aligned just enough to matter. Ethan finally drew a slow breath and pulled. The cabinet door opened without resistance, smooth and deliberate, as if it had been waiting for that exact moment. Inside, there was no gold, no scattered relics, no sudden display of wealth. Instead, the space revealed something far more precise. Shelves lined with carefully sealed containers, each labeled with numbers and dates, and in the center, a compact metal case, different from the rest, its surface polished despite the years, its edges sharp and clean as if untouched by time. The pulse that had guided him seemed to settle here, no longer echoing but present, contained, like a signal that had reached its destination. Ethan reached for the case, lifting it with both hands, surprised by its weight. Not heavy, but solid, intentional. He set it gently on the table beside the leather folder. Rex stood now, stepping closer, his nose hovering just above the surface, not touching, just sensing. Ethan opened the latches slowly, the soft click echoing faintly through the chamber, and inside, instead of anything that shimmered or sparkled, there were documents, precisely arranged, maps layered beneath, transparent covers, coordinates marked with exact detail, and a small device secured in the center, its screen dark but intact. Ethan studied the maps first, tracing the lines with his eyes, recognizing patterns that stretched beyond the coastline, routes that connected distant points with deliberate accuracy, not random, not exploratory, but planned, designed to lead somewhere specific, somewhere hidden in plain sight. He turned to the device, pressing the edge lightly, and after a brief pause, the screen flickered to life, dim but readable. Numbers appeared first, then a set of coordinates, followed by a single line of text, simple and clear, as if written for only one person to read. Ethan did not speak the words out loud, but he understood them immediately. This was not a record of what had been hidden here. This was a guide to what still remained out there, something larger, something protected, something that required more than chance to find. Rex let out a quiet breath, his tail lowering gently, not in uncertainty, but in recognition, as if the path ahead had just revealed itself fully. Ethan closed the case slowly, his thoughts settling into a clarity he had not felt in years. This lighthouse had never been about what it held. It had been about what it pointed toward, and for the first time since he arrived, he understood that he had not simply discovered something beneath the floor. He had been led to the beginning of something far greater than himself. The words on the screen did not fade when Ethan closed the case. They lingered somewhere behind his eyes, steady and undeniable, like coordinates etched into memory rather than written on glass. He stood there for a long moment, the quiet hum of the chamber settling around him as if the space itself had exhaled. its purpose fulfilled, Rex shifted his weight beside him. Not restless, just aware, his gaze moving from the case to the narrow passage behind them, then back again, as if measuring distance, direction, possibility. Ethan placed the case back onto the table with care, not out of caution, but out of respect for what it represented. This was not something to carry away thoughtlessly. It was something to understand. He turned back to the leather folder, flipping through the pages more slowly now, each diagram revealing a larger pattern. The lighthouse was only one point, one anchor in a network that stretched beyond. The shoreline, the routes marked across the maps followed the contours of the ocean, tracing paths that curved and intersected in ways that felt almost organic, like veins beneath the surface of something much larger. And at the center of those paths, the coordinates from the device appeared again, repeated with subtle variations, as if confirming their importance from every angle. Rex moved closer to the table, his nose brushing lightly against the edge of one page, not searching, but recognizing. Ethan noticed the slight shift in the dog's posture, the way his ears angled forward just a fraction, and it was enough to draw his attention to a detail he had almost missed, a faint marking near the margin, smaller than the rest, but distinct, a symbol that matched the engraving on the cabinet. Ethan traced it with his finger, and something about its shape settled into place in his mind, not as information, but as meaning. This was not a map for anyone. It was a map for someone who knew how to read it, someone who had been trained to follow patterns that others overlooked. The realization did not come as a shock. It came quietly, like a truth that had always been there waiting to be acknowledged. Ethan closed the folder and looked around the chamber once more, the console, the walls, the hidden door now standing open. Behind them, all of it felt less like a discovery and more like a conversation that had finally begun. He stepped back toward the entrance, Rex moving with him in perfect rhythm, and as they reached the threshold, Ethan paused, turning slightly to take one last look at the room. The pulse was still there, steady and unchanged, but it no longer felt like a question. It felt like an answer. Something had been set in motion, not by chance, not by curiosity, but by alignment, the kind that could not be forced or rushed. Rex stepped onto the first stair, glancing back briefly, his eyes calm, certain, and in that quiet exchange, Ethan understood that whatever lay beyond the coordinates, whatever waited out there beyond the reach of land and light, it was not something he had to chase. It was something he had been prepared to find. And as they began to ascend, leaving the chamber behind, the lighthouse above did not feel empty anymore. It felt like a beginning the climb back up felt. Different, not heavier, not lighter, but clearer, as if each step carried less uncertainty than the one before it. And when Ethan pushed open the floor above, the last of the daylight greeted him with a soft, fading glow that stretched across the worn boards. The lighthouse breathed again, not through sound, but through presence, the kind that settles quietly into a place when something long dormant begins to stir. Rex moved ahead, stepping into the open room and pausing near the doorway, his ears lifting toward the distant sound of waves below, steady and endless. Ethan followed, brushing dust from his hands as he crossed the space, his eyes moving instinctively toward the narrow windows. The horizon stretched wide beyond them, the ocean reflecting the last light of the evening in slow, shifting bands of silver and gray. He stood there for a moment, letting the stillness settle into him. But this time, it did not feel empty. It felt filled with direction. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the small device from the case, turning it over in his hand as the screen flickered faintly once more. The coordinates remained unchanged, steady. Waiting, he stepped outside, the wind meeting him with a cooler edge now, carrying the scent of salt and distance. Rex followed closely, his posture alert but calm, both of them facing the open water as if drawn by the same quiet pull. Ethan lifted his gaze toward the far line where sky met sea, imagining the point marked on the map, not as a number, but as a place, somewhere beyond sight, beyond the comfort of land, yet not beyond reach. The lighthouse behind him stood silent, its presence no longer a mystery, but a marker, a beginning point in something much larger than he had expected. He glanced back once, not to question, but to acknowledge. The tower had done its part. It had revealed what needed to be seen, and now the path moved outward, into something unknown but not unfelt. Rex stepped forward slightly, his paws pressing into the rough ground near the cliff's edge, his gaze fixed on the horizon with a quiet certainty that did not need explanation. Ethan felt it too, not as a command, not as urgency, but as a steady alignment. The kind that forms when purpose meets timing without force. He took a slow breath, the wind moving past him like a whisper that carried no words but plenty of meaning. And as the light faded further, leaving the ocean darker and deeper, the coordinates in his hand no longer felt like numbers on a screen. They felt like a direction already set in motion, something that had been waiting not just to be found, but to be followed. The night settled slowly over the coastline, not with darkness alone, but with a quiet depth that made the horizon feel farther than it had just moments before. And Ethan remained at the edge of the cliff, the device still in his hand, its faint glow now the only steady light against the deepening blue of the ocean. Rex stood beside him, unmoving, his ears angled forward as if he could hear something beyond the reach of wind and water. Ethan lowered his gaze to the screen again, the coordinates unchanged, unwavering, and for a moment he simply stood there, not deciding, not questioning, just listening to the space between thoughts, because this was not the kind of choice that rushed itself. It unfolded, like everything else had since he arrived. He turned and walked back inside, the wooden floor welcoming him with its familiar creak, but now the sound felt different, less hollow, more grounded. The lighthouse no longer felt like a shell. It felt like a place that had completed its role. Rex followed closely, his paws steady against the boards as he moved toward the center of the room, pausing briefly over the opening in the floor before continuing on, as if acknowledging it, but no longer needing to return. Ethan crossed to the narrow staircase that spiraled upward toward the lantern room, his hand brushing lightly against the rail as he climbed, each step carrying him higher into the tower until the air shifted, cooler, touched by the night wind that slipped through the glass above. The lantern room was still, its large windows framing the ocean in all directions, and Ethan stepped into the center, looking out over the water that now stretched like a dark mirror beneath the sky. He placed the device down on the metal ledge near the glass, watching as its screen flickered once more, and for the first time, something changed. A small indicator pulsed softly near the coordinates, not blinking randomly, but in a steady rhythm that matched the pattern he had felt beneath the floor. Rex lifted his head immediately, his eyes locking onto the device before shifting toward the horizon, his body aligning with the direction as if the signal extended far beyond the walls of the lighthouse. Ethan followed that line instinctively, his gaze narrowing as he focused on a point far out at sea. At first there was nothing, just darkness layered over distance. But then, faint and subtle, a flicker appeared, so distant it could have been mistaken for a reflection, yet it held steady, pulsing once, then again, in the same measured rhythm, not bright enough to demand attention, but precise enough to be undeniable. Ethan did not move. He simply watched, letting the realization settle without resistance. Whatever lay out there was not lost. It was active, connected, part of the same system that had led him here. The lighthouse was not the end. It was the beginning of a path that extended beyond land, beyond what could be easily reached. Rex stepped forward, standing beside him, both of them facing that distant pulse in complete silence. And in that stillness, the distance between where they stood and where they needed to go no longer felt uncertain. It felt inevitable. The distant light did not fade. It held its place against the dark surface of the ocean as if it had been waiting for someone to notice it. And Ethan remained still, his eyes fixed on that faint pulse while the wind moved quietly through the broken edges of the lantern room. Rex stood beside him, his posture aligned with the same direction, his ears tuned not to sound, but to something deeper, something that connected the space beneath the lighthouse to the point far beyond it. Ethan reached for the device again, lifting it from the ledge and watching as the small indicator continued its steady rhythm, perfectly synchronized with the light in the distance. There was no doubt now. Whatever system had been hidden beneath the floor was still active, still reaching outward, and whatever waited at those coordinates was responding. He turned slightly, scanning the room as if seeing it for the first time, not as a place to stay, but as a place that had already given what it was meant to give. The lighthouse no longer held questions. It held answers, and those answers pointed away from it. Rex moved first, stepping back from the window and heading toward the narrow staircase, his movements calm and certain, as if the next step had already been decided long before Ethan understood it. Ethan followed without hesitation, descending the spiral steps with a steady pace, the sound of his boots echoing softly against the curved walls. When they reached the main floor, the air felt different again, no longer heavy with mystery, but open, like a space that had been cleared. He crossed the room, pausing briefly over the open section of the floor, glancing down into the darkness below, the pulse still faintly present. But now it felt distant, no longer calling, no longer guiding. It had done its part. He replaced the loose boards carefully, not to hide what he had found, but to preserve it, to leave it as it had been left for him. Rex waited by the door, his gaze shifting between Ethan and the outside, the night fully settled now. The sky stretched wide with scattered stars, and the ocean carried a deeper tone, steady and endless. Ethan stepped out into the cool air, pulling his jacket closer as the wind moved past him. He looked once more toward the horizon, the faint light still there, still pulsing, not brighter, not closer, but constant. He understood now that this was not something that would come to him. It was something he would have to move toward, not with urgency, but with intention. He glanced down at Rex, who stood quietly at his side, eyes reflecting the distant flicker, and in that shared silence, there was no need for decision, only recognition. The path ahead was not uncertain, it was simply unseen. And as Ethan turned away from the lighthouse and began walking toward the narrow trail that led down along the cliff, the rhythm of the pulse stayed with him, not beneath his feet this time, but within him, steady, measured, and guiding him forward into whatever waited beyond the reach of land and light. The path down the cliff was narrow and uneven, carved more by time than by intention, and Ethan moved carefully, his boots finding steady ground with each step, while the sound of the ocean grew stronger below, not loud, but constant, like a presence that had always been there. Rex moved ahead of him with quiet confidence, navigating the descent as if he had already walked it before, his body low and balanced, ears alert to every shift in the wind. Ethan kept his gaze forward, but the faint pulse from the horizon stayed with him, not as a sound, but as a rhythm that aligned with his steps, guiding without forcing. The trail curved along the edge of the cliff before opening onto a narrow stretch of rocky shoreline. The waves rolled in slow and steady, brushing against the stones, with a soft, repetitive motion that matched the distant signal almost perfectly. Ethan paused at the edge of the water, looking out across the dark surface where the faint light still flickered far beyond reach. The distance felt real now, not just something imagined from above, but something that would require effort, planning, and trust to cross. He glanced along the shoreline, noticing an old structure partially hidden between the rocks. A small boathouse, weathered but standing, its wooden frame worn by years of salt and wind. Rex had already turned toward it, his pace shifting slightly as he approached, not hurried, but certain. Ethan followed, pushing open the door with a gentle pressure, the hinges responding with a low creak that echoed softly inside. The space was simple, untouched by time in the same way as the lighthouse above. Tools hung neatly along one wall, ropes coiled with care, and in the center rested a small boat, its surface aged but solid, as if it had been maintained long enough to remain ready. Ethan stepped closer, running his hand along the edge. The wood felt firm beneath his fingers, not abandoned, just waiting. Rex moved to the front of the boat, placing his paws against it and looking back, his eyes steady, expectant. Ethan exhaled slowly, the realization settling deeper. Now, everything had been placed exactly where it needed to be, not by chance, but by design. The maps, the coordinates, the signal, and now this, a way forward that had been waiting long before he arrived. He turned his attention to the surrounding space, checking the supplies with a practiced eye, fuel stored in sealed containers, a lantern secured on a hook, even a folded jacket resting on a bench. Details that spoke not of abandonment, but of preparation, the kind left behind by someone who knew that one day, someone else would come. Ethan stepped back, looking from the boat to the open water beyond the doorway, the faint light still pulsing in the distance. unchanged, patient. Rex remained at the bow, his posture calm, his presence unwavering. And in that quiet moment, the distance between where they stood and where they needed to go no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like the next step in something already unfolding. Ethan reached for the rope, loosening it slowly, his movements steady, not rushed, because this was not about chasing something unknown. It was about continuing something that had already begun. The rope slipped free with a soft, deliberate motion, and Ethan guided the boat gently toward the edge of the water, the wood scraping lightly against stone before settling into the tide. The ocean welcomed it without resistance, rising and falling in a slow rhythm that felt almost synchronized with the pulse that had led him here. Rex stepped in first, his weight shifting naturally as he moved to the front, steady and balanced, as if the motion beneath him was something he had always understood. Ethan followed, pushing off from the shore with one final step, the land falling away behind them not with distance, but with quiet finality. The lighthouse stood above the cliff, its silhouette faint against the night sky, no longer calling, no longer guiding, just present, like a memory that had already done its work. Ethan reached for the small motor, checking it with practiced hands before bringing it to life. The sound was low, controlled, blending into the surrounding rhythm of water and wind rather than breaking it. The boat moved forward, cutting a narrow path across the dark surface, each ripple stretching outward before dissolving back into stillness. Rex remained at the bow, his gaze fixed ahead, his ears adjusting slightly with each subtle shift in the air, not reacting, but reading. Ethan kept one hand steady on the tiller, the other resting near the device, its faint glow casting a soft light across the edge of the boat. The coordinates remained constant, but the small indicator pulsed stronger now, not faster, just clearer, as if the distance between them and the source was narrowing in ways that could not be measured by sight alone. The shoreline grew smaller behind them, fading into a dark line that eventually disappeared entirely, leaving only the open water and the distant point of light ahead. Time seemed to stretch differently out here, not marked by minutes or miles, but by the steady alignment of movement and direction. Ethan did not rush. He did not question. He simply followed, allowing the rhythm to guide him the same way it had beneath the floor. The air grew cooler as they moved farther out, carrying a sharper edge that brushed against his face, but it did not distract him. It sharpened his focus. The light ahead grew slightly more defined now, not brighter, but clearer, its pulse more distinct against the darkness. Rex shifted his stance once, adjusting his balance as the boat moved over a deeper swell, then settled again, his body calm, his presence unwavering. Ethan glanced at him briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between them, then returned his gaze forward. The water beneath them seemed endless, but it no longer felt uncertain. It felt directed, as if the path itself had already been drawn long before they began to follow it. And somewhere beyond the reach of land, beyond the place where the lighthouse could no longer be seen, the destination was no longer just a point on a map. It was becoming something real, something that had been waiting not just to be found, but to be reached. The light ahead did not grow larger. It grew clearer, its pulse steady and measured as the boat carried Ethan and Rex across the open water. And when they finally reached the point where the signal aligned perfectly with the device in his hand, the ocean beneath them shifted in a way that felt almost imperceptible at first. Not a wave, not a current, but a subtle change in the texture of the water itself. Ethan eased the motor down until it fell silent, allowing the boat to drift, the world around them settling into a deep, quiet stillness. Rex stood at the bow, his body leaning slightly forward, eyes fixed on the surface just ahead, not searching, but recognizing. Ethan followed his gaze and saw it then, a faint outline beneath the water, not floating, not moving, but resting just below the surface, a structure, smooth and deliberate. Its shape too precise to be natural. He leaned over carefully, the cool air brushing against his face as he studied the form below. The pulse they had followed now emanated from this place, not as a signal anymore, but as a presence, something complete, something waiting. He reached into the boat and retrieved the small metal case, opening it once more, the device inside responding instantly, its screen brightening just enough to reveal a final line that had not been visible before. Simple, steady, and certain, Ethan did not need to read it twice, because the meaning settled into him the same way everything else had, quietly, without force. This was not about taking something from beneath the water. It was about unlocking something that had been protected. He looked back at Rex, who remained calm, his tail still, his eyes reflecting the faint glow of the device. And in that moment, there was no hesitation. Ethan reached toward the edge of the structure below, his hand hovering just above the surface until his fingers brushed against it. The contact was gentle, but immediate. The pulse shifted once more, not louder, not faster, but fuller, as if the connection had been completed. And then the water responded, not violently, not suddenly, but with a slow, deliberate movement, the surface parting just enough to reveal more of what lay beneath, panels sliding with quiet precision, revealing a hidden compartment. Within it, a sealed container, untouched, preserved, waiting. Ethan lifted it carefully into the boat, its weight balanced, its presence undeniable. But as he held it there, he realized something deeper. This was never about what was inside. It was about the path that led him here, the alignment of moments, the quiet signals, the trust he had placed in what he could not see. Rex settled back down at the bow, his posture relaxed now, his purpose fulfilled, and Ethan sat there for a moment, the ocean stretching endlessly around them, the lighthouse far behind, no longer visible, but no longer needed, because what he had found was not just something hidden beneath the floor or beneath the water. It was something that had been waiting for him to arrive, not by chance, but by the simple, steady truth that when someone continues to listen, even when the world grows quiet, they are often led exactly where they are meant to be.